Good evening and welcome to Writers Showcase. I'm your host, Scott Burton. We're excited for tonight's program, which features 3 writers from around the state. In our first piece, writer Loretto Jones walks us down the docks of a Juneau harbor and takes us into the life of a young woman faced with a difficult choice: to stay afloat in the stormy waters of her current life or to cross the Gulf in search of something new. Reading Jones's The Gladiator, please welcome Patricia Hull.
Kaya cradled the cell phone on her slender shoulder, listening to Al's incessant rant. A shadowy raven swept past, wings outstretched, coal black against the late afternoon sky, bathing downtown Juneau in an eerie golden light. Al's words forced dangerously close together. Al! She needed to interrupt. He took a deep breath, exhaling.
Yeah, I know.
She heard ice cubes tumble into a glass. After 10 years of sobriety, Al had started to self-medicate again.
Died instantly. No friggin' clue.
Al's voice stayed clipped, stretched out like a tight wire, guilt dancing on the thin cable. Kaya slumped against the boat's bulwark, then slid to the wheelhouse floor, head pounding, listening.
Jack had been underneath the boat since daylight, welding on the rudder shoe. The skipper left my bar before I could stop. When he turned the key, the propeller...
Al sucked a deep drag. Kaya pictured him sitting in his bar, the constant cigarette between his chapped lips, twisting the ends of his red handlebar mustache, the big nose and freckled face.
Bits of black neoprene, bits of pink and purple flesh floated on the surface.
He paused.
Should have stopped him, Kaya. Jack and I were together in Nam.
I know, Al. She opened the bottom half of the boat door, rummaging through the cooler. Al, she asked, why didn't he have a dive tender?
Jack's a dead fool. Bitched about him costing too much. He didn't need nobody watching his bubbles when he worked underwater.
Kaya pulled the cooler over for a closer examination of the contents. 3 soggy apples, a couple bottles of beer with the labels worn off, and a jug of water floating in the icy slush. The winter skyline glowed pearl gray against the massive base of Mount Roberts. There was a fresh dusting of snow covering longline gear on the back deck. Silver fishing hooks neatly circled around the metal tub's rims. Why didn't Jack pull the ignition key out before he dove? You taught me that one. Rule 1, take the key out of the ignition. Rule 2, disconnect the battery cables from the power. No spark, no propeller turning. Rule 3, hire a tender to watch your back. Kaya shut the door, popped the cap, and took a sip from the hair off the dog that had sunk its canines into her last night. She recoiled, crinkling her nose in disgust. The beer tasted like waterlogged cardboard.
No crap. I remember, Miss Kaya Crane, I was treading water in the Mekong River before you stuffed a regulator in your pretty little mouth.
Al, a former U.S. Navy SEAL, could blow up a bridge, hold his breath for 3 minutes, or kill without discretion. He'd retired from the night sweats, moved away from the ghosts of his own private war, 3 high-maintenance divorces, finally buying a waterfront bar in his hometown Kodiak for his golden retirement years.
I've spouted enough, Al said. So tell me, kid, how's things with your partner, David, isn't it?
He's disappeared. And suddenly Kaya didn't want to talk. Not anymore. Not to the police, not to David's drug dealers, alleged friends, the parade of titty dancers, or the newly appointed public pretender. She had spent all week in deposition and last night forgetting the polyester 3-piece suits and their yellow legal pads and the smoke-filled rooms, leading questions and closed doors. The big questions always lead to the disappearance of the undercover policeman who'd gone missing the same day as David. Darkness began to envelop Gastineau Channel. Pulling her long black hair back, she shifted the phone to her other shoulder, stretching her long legs out over the tiny wheelhouse floor. I'm still here. Me and the good ship MKP are still afloat tied to this old wooden dock. A bright beam flashed across the wheelhouse, and for a moment she was half blinded when the spotlight washed over her face. It's complicated, Al. I need $10,000 before spring or I lose the boat. A big steel vessel nudged ahead, inching along the face of the dock in front of the MKP. The name Gladiator was painted in 2-foot-high letters stretching across the bow. Some kind of boat, she thought, admiring the bank of sodiums mounted on the forward mast.
The work is westward, Kaya. M-O-N-E-Y.
He spelled each letter out slowly. Kaya didn't want to dwell on David's recent addiction to thin lines of cocaine and Quaalude cocktails. He'd ignored his court date, brought the heat down on her.
So when you come into Kodiak, here, my girl, you'd stay busy.
She knew too well the world of blackwater diving. There were no divers left in Kodiak, and with the price of bait fish next to nothing in Southeast, maybe, Kaya thought, it was time to go west. Al, let me think about it. I'll call you.
Okay, kid, stay in touch.
And then a dial tone. Kaya stared at the long line gear on the back deck. Could she make the season pay for itself? She'd never captained the MKP. That had always fallen to David. Self-doubt flooded in, and leaving town seemed saner than waiting for her once-upon-a-time lover to return. She stood watching the big boat tuck its stern into the dock 10 feet off the MKP's bow. It was a formidable moving wall of black steel, and judging from the size and massive bank of radio antennas on the roof, this boat was passing through on its way to the Bering Sea. The wind blew fresh off Mount Roberts, blowing the Gladiator away from the dock. Kaya saw a man standing alone in the wheelhouse, but no one stood on deck. She grabbed her wool coat on the way out. Odd, she thought, a boat that size without a single crew member on deck to handle the lines. The dock was treacherous, slick from the spray blown up from the last storm freezing to the dock. Half ice skating, she slid to where the boat had started to drift away. There, hanging off the side, the midline lay draped. She reached out and grabbed it, wrapping the heavy line around and under the dock's wooden rail. In the Gladiator's sodium lights, crystal flakes of snow danced like flecks of gold. Suddenly, the boat's back deck lights flashed on, and a man raced out of the galley door.
Hey, thanks there. You mind grabbing the stern line, too? I'll toss it to you,
he said, scrambling to the back of the boat. She caught it, securing it to the dock.
Sure glad you were here when I pulled in.
He trotted back toward the bow, tossing her that line. Where's your crew? She asked, passing him back the line.
That's a tale to tell.
He shook his head, pulling the slack out of the line.
Took 6 days coming out of Ballard, straight up the archipelago.
He looked at her and grinned.
There's a nasty north wind blowing out of Taku Inlet. Are you the one who let it blow like that?
Hey, is there a restaurant close by? Nothing open on Sundays except for the 5 bars downtown. She pulled her collar up and started to turn back to her boat.
A cup of coffee, then? There's a fresh pot on board.
His smile, almost an apology.
I haven't talked to a human being in a while. Kind of starved for talk.
Kaya understood loneliness. She had been trying to stay away from downtown. Trouble seemed to follow her last night into the triangle and sat on her shoulder at the Lucky Lady. Winter without David had created a desperate kind of despair, and she knew if she started to drink, she'd lose more than the boat. Staying meant thinking, waiting for something else to go wrong in her life. 6 days with only radio talk, she laughed. Loneliness ate her from the inside out, then nimbly crawled over the side of the Gladiator.
Good God,
he chuckled, pushing his cap back. Gray hair sprouted from underneath.
I've listened to every cassette tape 20 times. I can recite every word of Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire.
Music poured from the speakers on deck, competing with the idling hum of the boat's twin engines. The back deck of the Gladiator was big enough to park the MKP. He pushed the galley door open, ducking his head to enter.
Help yourself. Coffee's hot.
He gestured toward the white mugs hanging above the shiny oil stove. Kaya reached for a cup. Refill? She picked the pot off the hot stove. The man's blue eyes were magnified through thick glass lenses. He peered at her, and she felt his gaze. He nodded down toward his cup, and she poured. "Nice boat. You headed west?"
"Yep. Opelio crab opens in a week, then King's," he replied, stirring condensed canned milk into the cup. "Pots are stored in Dutch."
"I crabbed out there a few winters back, aboard the Tanya Rose," she said.
Gulf Coast boat, isn't she? 90-footer, green hull?
Kaya nodded her head.
I've seen her tied up over at Alaska.
"That's the boat." She slid into a bench that wrapped around the table. Bells chimed from the shiny brass clock mounted on the bulwark.
"You fished the Bering Sea, huh?"
He arched his thick eyebrows, then took his glasses off, rubbing them on the only clean patch of his oily T-shirt.
"Petite thing like you?"
"My name's Kaya." She held out her hand, ignoring the remark.
"My friends call me Buddy."
He reached across the table.
"Hey, you got a grip, girl. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?"
The skin on the back of his hand was thin and liver-spotted, with blue veins bulging underneath. The thick fingers were calloused, with deep creases stained black from years working in grease and oil. "I'm 19, she said, looking at the bowl of fruit on the table. There was none of the usual dog-eared girly magazines or cake pans full of stale cookies. On the bookshelf behind the settee, she saw the works of John Steinbeck, Jack London, and Ernest Hemingway. The stove kept the galley warm, pleasant. "You bring this boat up from Seattle all by yourself?" She pulled a thick book bound in red leather from the shelf behind the settee.
"That's Shakespeare you hold in your hand. Ever read him?"
Buddy was earnest, his tone hopeful. "I don't read much." "I see." His eyebrows crossed. He sipped his coffee.
"Well, to answer your question, I started this voyage with an old friend."
His voice was deep and reverberated around the small galley.
"He jumped ship in Petersburg."
A smile pulled at the corners of his mouth.
"Methinks my old partner had tired of large expanses of water." "That, and perhaps," he rubbed his grizzled chin, "he rang the bell one too many times at Quito's cave."
He replaced his reading glasses on a nose that looked like it had been broken several times, then plastered back with putty. Buddy, it looked like to Kaya, had his habits under control. He had a boat, crab permits, and a galley full of books instead of cheap booze. She cleared her throat. Deep in debt and tired of lying to herself, she knew her best option was, like Al had said, westward. "You're crossing the Gulf of Alaska without a crew?" she asked, looking around the galley.
"That's correct."
He shook his head like even he found it hard to believe. The boat tugged at the line, seeming ready to move. Kaya shared the same impatience, wanting to be free of the decisions, the lies, and the burdening responsibility of trying to make something work that was already broken. Hard to say when David would reappear. And, too, when he did, there was the death of the undercover cop. Guilty or not, he would go to jail for dealing. The gladiator was going somewhere, had a life laid out like a well-marked chart.
"Fishing now?"
Buddy asked and refilled her cup. "I'm between crew," she lied. "Thinking about going westward. More money." She looked upward. "I like how the access ladder goes from the galley up to the wheelhouse."
"It's safer that way. Don't have to go on deck when the weather turns inside out."
Leaning back against the seat cushion, he pushed his coffee cup around and around.
"Are you looking for a cook job?"
"Cook? Because I'm female? No. I need a ride to Kodiak."
"Why?"
He stroked the gray stubble on his chin.
"You need to leave town?"
"You my probation officer?" Kaya snorted. "I have a job waiting."
"And a man can't be too careful these days, what with the drugs and the crazies running from the law."
Buddy pulled out a package of Oreo cookies.
"Want a cookie?"
He pushed the bag toward her.
"Okay, what kind of experience you got?"
"I got the want to." She took a cookie. "I've made the Gulf trip 3 times, safer with 2 people on board." Leaning forward, she forced a smile. "Look, Buddy, my ex-partner's the alleged felon, not me." He grabbed a handful and started to lick the creamy filling, dipping one cookie after another into his coffee.
"I'm addicted to sugar and a raging reformed drunk," he confessed.
"I can give you a list of names," Kaya grinned.
"What is it you're escaping from?"
He shifted in his seat. His eyes danced with humor, bold and steady.
In the middle of winter, across the water, the biggest water to one of the toughest fishing ports in Alaska.
What's my leaving got to do with escaping?
You're serious, aren't you?
As a heart attack.
Okay, tell you what. I need to make some calls uptown, stow your stuff on board, but I pull out on the ebb. That's a couple hours from now, with or without you. I got a full crew of deck apes flying into Kodiak. No time to bring up another man. So I'll give you a ride, but that's it. Got that?
I'll be here, I promise, she said. He pushed up from the table. He looked down at her, his smile perennial.
Let me show you this majestic lady.
She followed him up the ladder to the wheelhouse where everything came in technicolor and in twos in case something broke hundreds of miles from nowhere.
There's a life raft on deck and all the electronics are new. Here's the EPIRB.
The what?
It sends a signal the Coast Guard can pick up in case of an emergency. There are 8 survival suits in the locker on deck by the galley door. Pick one, try it on. Keep it by your bunk.
She saw radio phones, radar sets, low-RAN receivers, and color photometers that measured depth, salinity, and the temperature of the sea. Gauges and screens filled the horseshoe-designed console. The ship's teak wheel sat in the middle. What's this? Kaya touched a black metal box.
The autopilot Mikey.
Autopilot? Meaning this boat can steer itself?
Gladiator only needs your eyes.
He pointed to the day bunk.
I sleep up here. There's 4 bunks in the forecastle. Take your pick of the places where you want to lay your head. Fair warning, kiddo, I snore. You may want to sleep in the engine room.
She followed his lanky frame down the ladder and back into the galley.
I'm going uptown now to call the Gladiator's owners.
He grabbed a yellow rain jacket and stepped on deck. What are you going to do? Pack and lock up my boat. She pointed to the wooden gill netter bobbing silently across the dock. I'll be here.
I'll leave the door unlocked,
Buddy said. The snow had turned to a hard rain. She watched him drop off the side of the boat onto the float, striding up the steep ramp that connected the dock to the shore. It was a minus tide, but he walked straight up the steep ramp without slowing down. He turned, disappearing into the alley next to the Crystal Saloon and Ballroom. She dragged herself back to the MKP to check the batteries and bilge pump wires, running her hand over the tie-up lines, feeling for frays. She looked at her watch, too late to call Al. He'd be in his cups mourning the loss of his best friend. Her eyes wandered over the boat. It had been her home. Kaya looked around at the derelict boats, crab pots, and abandoned nets that crowded the city dock. She knew all the faces, blaming everyone for what had happened to David. Maybe, she hoped quietly, David would suddenly appear and stop her from leaving. She pulled the delicate silver chain over her head and looked at the scrimshaw sailing ship on the ivory pendant, rubbing her thumb over the intricate ink lines carved in the yellow walrus tooth. 3 winters ago, David had fastened the necklace around her neck, their first Christmas after they'd started to fish together. She left it on the compass and scrawled in the logbook, February 1st, 1979, David, gone westward, keep her floating, be back in time for sockeye, Kaya. On the first trip across the deck, she carried her scuba tanks, 2 Steelies and 1 pony bottle full of air. Next, her dry suit, and the weight belt went in the deck locker. Music and laughter poured from the deck of the Crystal Saloon, but pride kept her shuffling her gear aboard the Gladiator. Buddy had part of it right, but she wasn't running.
In this next piece, our setting could be any of our houses when we try to install or repair something on our own, DIY or do it yourself, as they say. You see the ad for the free whatever you're going to install yourself. What a deal, right? Reading Jonas Lamb's narrative poem, Preparations for Free Wood Stove, please welcome Clint Farr.
Free sounded good. All that cast iron and unseen engineering, convection, conduction, and combustion put to work warming my drafty old house. Just rip down the wall in the corner of the living room and pipe that sucker out of the old chimney. Interior wall demolition, 16 hours, blood and sweat labor. Interior cleanup, 2 hours, sweat, plus black lung, plus 2 times howling through Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones. Remove subfloor, reframe subfloor, 2x10s, 3/4-inch plywood, $100, 6 hours. Chimney flue liner, 22 feet, shiny, stainless, $1,200. Install flue liner plus remove chimney cap, 8 hours at $70 per hour. A lot for 2 fearless roofers, father and son, both slow, dangerous, and lazy, $560. Thermix chimney insulation, 2 dusty bags, vermiculite and Portland cement, $110, plus upper respiratory wheezing, plus reinstall chimney cap, 40 feet off the ground, no harness, no rope. They call these roofs widowmakers. 4 hours fearful homeowner labor, $0, 42 new gray hairs. Tile subfloor, new slate hearth, slate, tile, mortar, grout, cement board, $200 plus 6 hours plus minor marital strife. Between the flooring and wall finish phases, we had a few fires. We joked with a friend taking on his own free wood stove project. First one with a fire in the box wins. Began cutting project scraps into 15-inch lengths, busting up pallets, trying out pressed bio logs, stretching our stiff and forgotten fire-building muscles, stacking kindling in the tiny box, observing whether the clearances we decided upon were legit. We knew they were not quite to code, but hoped not to make adjacent walls hot to the touch. A few warm weekend afternoons, lazy, the 3 of us, the dogs too, sprawled on the rug before the stove. 2 naps we won't soon forget. Small ceremonies of thanks, bowing to 135 pounds of hot cast iron in our small house, built a century ago for miners much tougher than us. Next day, back to it. Hang 5/8-inch drywall over old lath, salvage drywall plus 1 new piece of 5/8 cut in half in the rain in the Home Depot parking lot to fit into Subaru. Plus 4 hours, incredible cursing, lots of loud rock and roll, 12 light beers. Add furring strips to ceiling, attempt to bring framing flush with existing finished ceiling, plus hang drywall, 4 hours. Second attempt, after not flush with 1.5 inches of furring, try 1 3/4 this time. 2 hours, bloody hand, 2 Rainiers, 1 stout. Tape, mud, sand, drywall, repeat, repeat, repeat. $1,000 to contractor, 8 hours over 7 days. First frost, can't run furnace. Too much drywall dust. Air return covered by plastic sheeting within dust enclosure system. 50 degrees inside house. Increased marital strife. Decreased electric bill for October. Cut check to contractor. Amazing job, seamless. Prime drywall. More respiratory investment. Carefully mop down and sweep up drywall dust, delicately take down plastic, wipe down adjacent surfaces. 2 late nights, red eyes, too much beer, dust and paint. Remove old skim coat cement from 100-year-old brick chimney. 2 hours, new dust, new mess. Try to drill pilot holes into brick chimney with regular 7-amp cordless drill. 2 hours, little progress, huge headache, major marital strife, child neglect. The next day, same job, this time roto hammer rental, $22, 1 hour labor, satisfaction priceless. Cut and hang metal lath over brick sheet lath, $13 plus 2 hours, bloody hands. Paint primed walls, 2 coats, 1 gallon paint, $25. 1 hour family labor, mother, father, son. 1 dog sneezing the whole time doesn't like the smell. seems to approve of the color, white. 3 days off. Just enough time to savor the extra space of having no wood stove on the hearth. Rearranged living room, 32nd birthday, party, wine, soup, cake, a great seat, rocking chair on hearth. Do we really want a wood stove? I ask. Response equals look, indicative of marital strife. Tomorrow, install stacked stone veneer over lath-covered chimney interior. Mix mortar, layout, and cut stone. So much wet, white, muddy cement. Paste on front porch deck boards. Check level, check corners. Stack, trim. Mason's hammer. Hope. Luck. Finished. 3 hours. 4. 10 plus. A short break for parent-teacher conference. Stinky torn jeans covered in cement. Wrestle stove back to hearth from kitchen. Raise the pipe. Light the kindling. Crack a beer. Check the kindling. Check again. Open the damper. Check again. Add wood. Wait. Warmth. Glow. Crisp November night. Cast iron kiss. 66 hours. 16 weeks. $3,230, not counting beer. Free wood stove.
In our next selection by Lee Newman, we follow our narrator through the first summer after her parents' divorce. While her story is unique, the themes of sadness, loss, insecurity, and adventure that are woven into this tale are universal. Reading a selection from Newman's memoir, From Still Points North, please welcome Elizabeth Picell Davis.
In the largest state in the Union, a state built on gold rushes and oil pipelines, 90-pound king salmon and 20-pound king crab, a lot of things come prefaced with the phrase, Great Alaskan. There's the Great Alaskan Salmon Bake, and the Great Alaskan Lumberjack Show, and the legendary 8.6 Great Alaskan Earthquake, and of course, a species of larger-than-life male citizen who shall be referred to from here on out as the Great Alaskan Dad. Some identifiers. The Great Alaskan Dad flies a plane on floats in the summer and skis in the winter. He hunts for caribou, moose, wild sheep, wild goats, geese, and ducks, plus fishes for halibut, salmon, and trout. No matter where he goes, his outfit remains the same. Falling down hip boots, patched wool pants, drugstore sunglasses with Polaroid lenses so he can spot fish underwater, and a Stearns life jacket with a red plastic tag that reads, "Pull in case of an emergency," which has never been pulled despite his frequent, almost always fatal emergencies. A buck knife, the blade stained with dried, unidentified blood and slime, dangles from a lanyard somewhere on his person. At one time or another, he has suffered from an unforgettable, for all involved, case of beaver fever, a violent lower intestinal disease caused by drinking downstream from an active lodge. At one time or another, due to a plane crash or bad planning, he has had to live 4 days in the bush off tasteless, ancient pilot bread and a jar of powdered tang. The Great Alaskan Dad can sew on his own buttons, patch his own waders, repack his own shotgun shells, and repair his own boat motor, even as the boat is filling with water in the middle of the ocean. The Great Alaskan Dad can land a Piper Cub on a 150-foot-long gravel bar, which is technically impossible, according to all aviation authorities. He can outrun a grizzly bear by running very fast, or at least faster than his hunting buddy, which, by the way, according to a Great Alaskan Dad, is the only way to survive a grizzly bear. So don't curl up, play dead, and make yourself into a human meatball, like those dopey forest rangers advise. And he can outrun this bear and this buddy with 100 pounds of freshly dressed moose on his back. He can make a fire out of wet green wood in the middle of winter, just as the blizzard starts, using his last match, which he strikes with his fingers nearly, but not totally, paralyzed by the frostbite. He can and will also defend the veracity of the above claims to the point of shooting saliva across the room, should any family member dare challenge the few overly extravagant or Jack London-esque details therein. In addition, although he might not bring it up around the campfire, the Great Alaskan Dad has invented a diaper out of alder leaves and garbage bags, which he made when all of the Pampers that the Great Alaskan Mom had packed happened to fall out of the raft. The Great Alaskan Dad has piloted a plane while his airsick Great Alaskan Child projectile vomited inside the fur-lined hood of his parka. And he has, not mythically or romantically or hyperbolically in the least, grabbed that same child's belt loop or leg before that child fell into a raging stream, or fell out of a flying plane, or slipped off the boat, or wandered off a cliff, or tumbled down the crevasse of a glacier, or ate the poisonous blue berries, which were not blueberries, or sauntered directly into the path of a black bear with 2 newborn cubs. Where all of this experience might not help him, though, is in the land of toothbrushes and crustless peanut butter sandwiches, recommended daily vitamins and monsters under the bed. In short, the world of domestic survival, which is where my Great Alaskan Dad and I land the first summer after my parents' divorce. It's June, the first week of salmon fishing season, and for the past 6 months, I've been away from Anchorage, Alaska, where I grew up, in order to relocate with my mother to Baltimore, Maryland, her childhood home. The first day I'm back up north, I find out that Dad has moved from our old house by the mountains into a new house across town. The house is big and sunny and filled with lots of wall-to-wall beige carpet, but no furniture. It's 8 o'clock at night. Time for bed, Dad says. He rolls out 2 identical down bags designed to keep you warm in temperatures up to 40 below, on the beige carpet. I hop in my bag, crumple up my jeans for a pillow. The sky through the windows is a blazing, sun-heated white. We have no blinds or curtains. Shut your eyes, he mumbles. I shut my eyes. But I am 8 years old. I squirm. I hum. I kick Dad. I whisper, I can't sleep. Can you sleep? Tell your brain it's nighttime. Your brain will believe anything if you say it over and over again. It's nighttime. My voice echoes off the blank plaster. But my father's brain is better at believing than mine, it seems. He's asleep already, his mustache twitching mid-dream. 2 weeks later, we're duking it up in the upstairs bathroom. Dad stands roaring in the doorway, trying to convince me to take a bath, or at least comb my hair. I crouch inside the shower stall, hiding, wearing only my flowered underwear and undershirt. I'm a tiny, runtish girl with twiggy fingers and a dense rind of dirt on my elbows and knees. The shower is an enormous stretch of blue tile and glass with 3 shower nozzles at 3 different heights. One for Papa Bear, one for Mama Bear, one for Baby Bear. The idea for this family-sized bathing arrangement came from my mother, who designed this new house, not knowing that by the time it was built, she and I would have already moved outside, as Alaskans call anywhere beyond the borders of our state, including Paris, Rome, Buenos Aires, Istanbul, and Hackensack, New Jersey. Dad and I might not have spent the last winter together, but I still know one thing. If you're going to run from my father, you really need to make sure that you have a long, unobstructed area ahead, if not a vista, because he's going to be right behind you catching up. Water drips from the broken faucet, pinging against the tiles. A dad-shaped shadow drifts across the shower door. The glass has a pre-made cloud inside it, a crystallized puff of decorative steam. "Come on," he says. "Let's get realistic." I curl up tighter. "Either you're coming out or I'm coming in." Dad counts to 3. I listen dully. There's nowhere for me to go except between the thin tiles of grout. In he comes, tossing me over his shoulder and setting me down on my bottom on the bathroom counter, and I scream. Dad's face goes ashen. He stands me up on the counter off my thighs. In the long mirror lining the wall above the double sinks, we both look at the edges of the rash on the backs of my legs. A rash I've been hiding since my arrival, never undressing in front of him, bandaging the boil-like welts myself, not entirely successfully. The crusted scabs have broken open and reinfected. A trail of thin, clear ooze leaks down my thighs. Dad blinks. He steps back. There's no medical reason for my rash. The doctors have told my mother. I consider telling Dad this, if only to stop his face from scrambling around for an expression. But if there isn't any medical reason, then I'm pretty sure the rash is somehow my fault. The same goes for my weight loss. I'm a bad eater, or I have a bad stomach, or I don't try hard enough to keep the food inside. My teeth stick out, my ribs stick out, and my head is a big wobbly ball on the top of my neck. "Okay," Dad says. "We've had a rough spring. Nothing to worry about. Nothing some antibiotics and a little protein can't fix." In his hand, however, he still has the comb. A black dime store comb with rows of tiny close teeth. It's the one hair instrument he owns. It belongs on the counter with his one bottle of shampoo, which he uses as soap and shaving cream, and his one disposable razor. He lifts the comb slowly towards me, and I throw my arms over my head. The comb is going to snag on my hair, or what's left of my hair, which is by now a matted, snarled pelt. I haven't gone near it, not even to wash it, since coming to Alaska. Well, I've tried once. I thought about it. But I'm still too scared of touching it or having anyone else touch it, a fear that my father also does not know about, not having seen me with lice a few months prior, nor at the beauty parlor where the stylist swooped my waist-long blonde hair up, sawed it off at the base of the ponytail with her brisk professional scissors. The result? A ragged blonde tuft that caused little old ladies in restaurants all over Baltimore to redirect me to the boys' room. Dad sets down the comb. He leans his fists on the counter, his arms muscling up. Is he mad? Am I in trouble? Dad loved my long hair. He used to make us matching mustaches from it, draping the long blonde strands over my upper lip. Mom didn't tell him about the lice, probably. The two of them don't speak. Dad leaves the bathroom, coming back a few minutes later with a kitchen fork and a pair of fish gutting scissors. Bent-bladed, thick, heavy surgical scissors that he brings from the hospital to fillet salmon in the garage. He lines up the equipment on the counter on a hand towel, as if he's going into the operating room. He's a very good surgeon. Grown-up strangers in town tell me this all the time, pointing to their knees and their hips, showing me how they can walk again thanks to him. But I'm trembling already. I keep my eyes on the comb, just to make sure he isn't about to use it. The comb is worse than the scissors. The comb will get stuck in the knots and tear out my hair by the roots. Dad points to the counter. I lower myself into a crouch, resting my chin on my knees. The bathroom smells of steam and pee. In the distance, the windows of the houses rattle as a float plane takes off on the lake outside. Lee, my father says, which is already worrisome. My name is Lee, but only according to my birth certificate. Dad calls me Leafer, or Pookie, or sometimes Pooks. I hunch up a little tighter. He approaches with the fork. What I am doing now, he explains in his calm, rational, professional voice, a voice he uses with his patients at the office, is loosening the knots, in order to determine which we can untangle. He moves slowly, his hands stay away from the comb. But I don't want this doctor, Dad, this understanding, gentle surgeon who picks through my hair with the wide teeth of the fork, teasing out the hairs, strand by strand. I want my dad, who should be telling me to stop the waterworks and suck it up, who 3 years from now, when we tip our raft in a rapid-filled canyon and watch our gear float off downstream as we head directly for a boulder, and I begin to scream hysterically, smacks me on the top of my skull with an oar and tells me, "You're okay, got it? Now paddle." I lean into the mirror. My father gives up on the fork and begins scissoring through the little hair that I have left. Clumps brush against the back of my neck and slide to the floor. My rash itches. My legs shake. I dig my toes into the counter. Dad makes a hard strangled sound. He is crying. I shut my eyes. I hunch forward, the air shivering and cold on my neck where the hair is gone. Not to hear him or his choky-sounding sobs, not to let him hear my own tears that keep slopping out, I do the thing that he always does when he's gutting fish or tying flies. I hum a floaty, no-tune song, blowing the air up through my teeth so it comes out as a whistle. 2 hours later, on the dock at the back of the house, Dad and I don't discuss what he did during the previous spring while I was gone. Nor do we discuss why my body is melting down. Nor do we discuss the new custody arrangement, which gives me only 11 more weeks this summer in Alaska, plus Christmas in December, meaning that I will spend most of the year for the rest of my life in Baltimore. Instead, we get the plane loaded, and we get out of there, away from the mirror, away from the bathroom and the house in the city of Anchorage, into the bush. Our plane is a 4-seat Cessna 185 on floats. Over Cook Inlet, Dad keeps us low, swooping over the cold, gray expanses to point out surfacing beluga whales. I sit beside him, wearing my matching headset and holding my matching steering wheel. He pretends to fall asleep after a while. I take over the controls the way I'm supposed to, checking and rechecking that our nose is level. "Dad," I say over the crackle of radio static. "Dad?" He saws off a phony snore, his eyes still shut. "You're fine. You're doing great. But keep your eyes on the artificial horizon." I stare at the two-dimensional plane in the gauge, its wings teetering over the line between the painted land and the sky. No throwing up, I tell myself. Co-pilots don't throw up, or get scared, or let their planes crash into the ocean, or look over to see if their father is really sleeping or just pretending to sleep. And he is pretending, right? He always pretends. It's like a fire drill, but in the sky. "Eyes on the horizon, Leifer," Dad says, opening his eyes. "You're in control. You're 100% capable." I take my hands off the steering wheel and puke in his lap. At last, we spot the deep gray channel of Beluga River. Dad brings us down with a hard slapping landing. There are no romantic northern pine trees here, no sap-scented breezes. The air reeks of fish and gulls. The water flows by, choked with mud and red, bloated, dying salmon. Walls of alder line the riverbanks. Clouds of mosquitoes hum in the branches. Grizzly tracks paw across the sand. We dump our tackle boxes by a driftwood log. At this time, my dad isn't the master fly fisherman he will soon become. The fisherman artist, with his delicate rod, catching and releasing, throwing C-shaped casts over dappled creeks. It is 1980 in Alaska, a state with 3,000 rivers and 3 million lakes. The sporting mores are not quite as respectful or picturesque. We set up our spin poles with giant, shiny pixies, slabs of silver metal, gussied up with an appetizing glop of plastic salmon eggs. The hooks are yawning trebles, in effect, mini anchors with 3 lethal barbed points. As usual in the summer, the river is red with fish, throbbing with movement in shallows where the salmon fight for space to lay their eggs. With the sun broiling down on us and hours to go before the 11 p.m. sunset, I prowl the bank in my boy-sized hip boots, the tops sloshing down off my thighs, the feet filled with freezing mud and water. I cast upstream and get my hook caught in a bush. I cast downstream and get my hook caught in the weeds. I snag on a rock in the shallows. I hook my own jeans. Down the river, as always, Dad has a fish on. He fights it through the boulders, wading in up to his chest. I swing my pixie in the sun, studying the drops of water glistening off the line. "Leafer," Dad says, holding up a salmon. "Hook in the water." I climb on the plane float, sitting on a life jacket to protect my rash. Deep in the current, my lure bumps along the bottom of the river. I daydream about a seagull that I trained to sit on my shoulder like a parrot. My line jerks. My rod bends a little funny. And bam! My line is sizzling through the river, zigzagging through the shallows. I jump off the float, already running, half letting the fish yank out more line, half pulling it back up the shore, not to mention half listening to my dad as he shouts, "Watch your drag! Pump and reel! Watch your tip! Reel! Reel! Oh, that a girl!" Fish, drunk and screaming, I inch the flopping salmon onto the beach, then run for our trusty wooden club. Only now do I see what I've hauled in. The fish is unmistakable. The swollen back, the hooked mouth, the mottled gangrene-colored skin. I've caught a humpy, the lowest species of salmon in the salmon family, a fish mocked statewide for its swamp creature looks and lack of intelligence. Worse, my humpy is soft, lumpish, at the end of its natural lifespan. I look up at Dad, waiting for him to laugh. He rocks on his heels. "Now," he says, "that's a beauty." "But a keeper," he says. "Throw her in the take-home pile." To prove his point, he steadies the fish for me, holding it firmly against the gravel. Slowly, I raise the club. The fish looks up at me with its glittering green, very alive eyes. Its gills heave, its fins twitch. I shut my own eyes as I bring down that club hard, over and over, bits of blood and skin splashing up onto my cheeks, the skull creaking, giving way to mush. Still, I don't stop, as if I'm listening for Dad to thunder at me, "That's enough." But he doesn't. Above us, seagulls wail, swooping down for scraps. Hour after hour for the rest of the day, we bring in humpy after humpy. Our tempo turns swift, methodical. We bash them on the head, bleed them by the throat, throw them in the waterlogged storage compartment in the floats. The more we catch, the more we have to catch, as if in our minds the next unnecessary salmon will justify the previous. Neither of us talks as the pile grows, the pebbles at our feet turning flecked with blood. If Mom was here, we would have made a fire to keep her warm while she read her novel on the log. If Mom was here, she would have told us to knock it off. Not because we'd caught enough fish, but because we were all too tired and hungry and it was time for a big hot plate of spaghetti. The moon rises, the mosquitoes swarm, the sun lowers in the white sky. Still, we stay and stay, catching and clubbing and bagging, not going home as if we don't ever have to go home, until it's too dark and dangerous to stay any later, and we have to take off. "Great job today," my dad says over the headset as we fly over Fire Island. "You're a champ fisherman, you know that?" "I think my last one was 8 pounds, I say. "Maybe." "Sure it was. A state record, I bet. We'll have to look it up." I smile. It isn't a real lie that we're telling each other. It's a fairy tale lie, a fishtail lie, the kind great old Alaskans tell each other about the 500-pound halibut that once leapt into their rowboat and sank it before leaping back out and swimming off. Besides, I might really be a champ fisherman one day, if I practice casts and keep my rod tip held up, and if I live in Alaska for forever, like my dad.
So that's all the time that we have for this evening. Thank you so much, actors. Let's get it right here. And writers, can you please stand? Loretto Jones and Jonas Lamb with us here in the audience. Thank you. And thanks to Lee Newman, who's not here with us tonight. Thanks also to our studio audience and to you for watching Arts at 360's Writer Showcase. For more information on our writers and actors, to rewatch the program, or to learn how to submit to Writer Showcase, please go to 360north.org. Thank you. Good night.
Funding for Arts at 360 comes from Northwind Architects and Rainbow Foods of Juneau.